Hello, everyone. My name's Tiffany. I'm the Tipsy artist. And today we are painting this beautiful painting for the Halloween season. So this is the inspiration. I have painted this in my classes in the past, and now I am bringing it to you for a painting kit. So I wanted to give you a look at the big inspiration, and then I'm going to switch camera views and we're going to go ahead and do the smaller version that comes with the painting kit that comes with all your supplies that you can find on tipsyartist.com. But here it is. And I just wanted to say hello from my studio before I go ahead and switch camera views. So without further ado, here we go. I'm going to switch. And there we go. All right. Roll up my little hair here, get situated, get my little peepers on. All right, so as I mentioned, all of your supplies come to you in a cute little box, and let's get a little visual on that, what those look like, brand new, and your canvas and your line art, transfer paper, some instructions, paint plates. The only thing that you'll need to get will be your water. So that's the only thing you're going to have to get. I have everything else for you. And let's go ahead and let's talk about the trace first. So I do have a much longer video that goes through this step by step. So I'm just going to do a quick little overview on this. So again, here's your line art, your transfer paper. When you go to apply this, you want to just center your transfer paper right in the middle of the canvas. And then I like to just tape right up here at the top. You don't want to paint this, not paint. You don't want to tape the sides. You want to leave this free and clear so that you can constantly lift up and check your work as you go. Because you definitely want to make sure that you get all that detail work in place before you remove this, because it's pretty much impossible to go back and line this back up again. So you want to make sure you get all those details in place. So again, I put the transfer paper down first, tape up here at the top. Then I go ahead and put your line art. I just center that as well, right over the top. Make sure that there's transfer paper underneath, that it's lined up together. And then I just tape again here at the top. Then I go ahead and get the pencil. Again, that comes with your kit here. And everywhere you see black, I basically just follow over the top, even the shading. I want to make sure and get all that shading done because that's going to really help support your process, especially as a beginner. Take advantage of all the shadow work that you can get in place ahead of time. So jumping ahead here, since this takes quite a bit of time, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this since I know I have all the detail work in place. All right, so initially your work will look just like this lighter line because it's that graphite. And so that makes that transfer. I did go ahead and leave this uninked because that is really light and you don't really want to contend. That's just about as much shadow as you need, that lightness. And you don't really want to have to contend with the hard black ink line with everything else. But for every place else on the painting, that black line that you will ink on to follow everything that we've done with our transfer process, that really serves you well to be able to actually come in fact, I'm kind of looking here at my process. In fact, you can kind of see there's our little nose right there. And I'm going to actually hard line in that mouth a little bit more here too, because that'll actually help serve me a little bit more. And yeah. All right, so now I feel like we're really good to go. All this black inking will really help support you. It'll bleed through a little bit or it provides that nice shadow work. So as it goes through that progression when you need it to bleed through, it will, or it provides a nice shadow underneath the paint. So it's going to really help you, especially as a beginner. All right, so we've got all of that work done. And again, for a longer tutorial, I definitely have that in the description to show you where to go ahead and learn how to do all the transfer process. And it's also, every time you go buy a paint kit, that description that's underneath that describes the paint kit, that link is always there on our website as well. That's another fun, easy place to find it. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about our paint. So you will get a brand new box of paint. This is always long lasting. It lasts for more than one painting. So I am definitely reusing some of my older boxes of paint here. And I do have a little bit of a head start with some titanium white and some Mars black out. And let me go ahead and talk to you too about when you start to get your paint out. This is acrylic paint. You always want to recap whenever you're done using this. That'll keep it fresh and long lasting. It does have a silver foil liner, so you'll want to lift this off in order to be able to get the paint out of the tube. And then always recap when you're done. And then with your brushes, in order to preserve long life with your brushes, you always want to make sure, and when you're not using them, rinse them out, clean them quickly, or if you don't have a chance to get to them, at least let them sit in the water. Because if you let them sit out with the paint on the brush, then it can dry very quickly and ruin your brush. So that's just a really strong, helpful hint with your brushes and caring for your brushes. So this is our little family of brushes here. So we've got Mama, and then we have Little Buddy, and then we've got Little Bit. All right. So, and of course, yours will be new. So I always like to tell people, usually a little bit stiff when they're new. So I say, go for a little swim here in your water, a little twirl, and then do some pressure here to kind of squeegee out that extra moisture. And then your brush will be nice and moist and flexible and ready to use. All right. So again, we want to go ahead and get, I've worked ahead with a little bit of the titanium white. So you'll want to squeeze out some titanium white. So think about a quarter-size dollop of that. And then we're going to go ahead and get some primary cyan blue. So I will also do about a nice, nickel to quarter-size dollop of your primary cyan blue. And then let's go. Oh, I've got the blackout already. So you can just do a pea-size amount of the Mars Black for right now. That's about all we'll need to go ahead and get started. And then let's do a touch of our violet as well. So a little pea-size amount of that too. All right, so we've got our Mama brush, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up like a dollop of the blue, and then we're going to do a dollop of the white. Let's start by mixing those two together. Lightens it just a little bit here. And then you can also darken that up with a little bit of that violet. It's really pretty. And then just a little touch of black in certain areas of that too also brings that to a darker blue too. So that's really nice. So we're going to be using all of these different shades of blue in our sky. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap this around in a circle. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn this handle of the brush to where the flat side of the brush faces the canvas, parallel to the canvas there. Now, when we do our cut-in work, then I hold the brush a little bit more like a pencil. That gives me that thinner lineage side to make that more precise curve move around our moon. Do a little bit of a firm press to get that edge a little bit thinner. Okay, and then continue back over to the flat side of the brush. Just kind of push that color in. We'll work around that curve with our cut-in work. And firm press in to load up, and you can add a little bit more black to kind of blacken up that, darken and blacken the sky a bit more. And follow around that curve. And then you want to kind of feather out that color into the sky by turning that brush handle a bit more over to the side and kind of crisscrossing the brush a little bit to feather out those strokes. And on this side around the glow of the moon, I'm going to add a little bit more white, kind of lighten that up, give it a little bit of a glow around the moon. Work that in as we go. And again, go back to feathering out more of like a little circular pattern. Soft curve around. And then kind of blend that back in. Soft, gentle strokes with the brush. Just want to almost act like you're barely touching the canvas. And then I'll go back in with a little bit more of that darker blue. Work that in. And then, of course, you definitely want to make sure that you're not too dark around the hat, because you definitely want to have some contrast between the hat and the sky. So if you get too dark with your sky, then you're going to lose the shape of the hat. We don't want to do that. Kind of feather this out, go back into that circle, light hand, kind of crisscross that in, that stroke to give a little bit of texture. And then I'll cut in around the hat very carefully. If this feels a little tight for you and you're uneasy with this size of a brush, you can always switch over to one of your little kiddos, either a little buddy or a little bit. A little bit, you can do a little twirl into that paint and do your cut-in work right around the edge. Especially if you have a little bit more of a shaky hand, you can use this. It's really tiny in here, so I'm definitely going to use a little bit in here. I definitely want contrast to make that little line show up. Grab a little bit of water to make that paint a bit more fluid and easier to push into the pores of the canvas. Start to really flow into that space. Take that around those curves. Lots of tiny little areas in here. I'm going to feather this back out. Blend back into that space. And crisscross back and forth. And then definitely using a little bit to come in around this little bat. So do that little twirl to get a nice fine point. Very carefully do your cut-in work. And then when this paint sets up and dries, we can reinforce that little bat head too here later on. And I would definitely use the permanent marker for that. It's just a lot easier, especially for that real tiny little detail. A little bit more water, again, fluid paint, and doing that cut-in work. More carefully around the edge. And now let's feather this out. So I'll come in as close as I can here. And then go back in with my little bit brush. Kind of feather that out. And do that little crisscross stroke with this brush too to help blend that back into the background. To where you're not just seeing a hard line. Continue to work this in. Really delicate hand right around that little wing. And a little bit of water really helps make that paint more fluid. And it helps you have a little bit more precision as you work into those smaller areas. And I'll finish out with a little bit of that crisscross back and forth. And then, Little Buddy is also a great tool too for some of that feathering out in a little bit of a larger area. So you can take the Little Buddy brush and just kind of crisscross back and forth. It's going to start to blend back into the larger area. It's kind of a gradual move until we switch back over to the Mama brush. And let him rest on the water. Have a little bit of water here. Some more blue. And my horn is pretty light, so I can get pretty dark again right underneath. And grab a little bit more of that violet. Kind of crisscross that brush out a little bit. Grab a little bit of some white. Looks like there's a little bit of cloud cover happening in this area. Turn the brush handle a bit more over to the side. Start to lighten up a little bit here. And do just a slight overpaint over that fur, just to make sure that we always have sky that comes in behind the ear that will come out in the foreground over the sky. And a little bit of that violet, kind of play with that in there. Again, crisscross, back and forth. That night sky. And then we're going to start to go to more like heavier violet and a bit more of the black with that mix. Work that in all the way to the base. All right, and then continue back over here. I did leave off with a little bit more of that solid black on this side, which is really helpful because that's really easy. Even if it sets up and dries a little bit, it's very easy to come back into with black since it's that dark color that you can blend back into easily. And then we're going to lighten up with a little bit of the white. Kind of act like you got a little bit of some cloud cover coming in here. A little bit of that violet. And crisscross that brush just a little bit. Starting to make those little clouds now and kind of crisscross the brush back and forth, little like dash strokes to give it that cloud texture. Adding a little bit of the white and the blue, that primary cyan blue that we had, and the violet. So it still kind of feels like that little extra dash dash, but we're just working back and forth in short little strokes. And just kind of crisscrossing that back and forth for that fun little cloud cover happening. Let's touch into a little bit of that violet. That white. And then let's go dark black again. And then hook that in right next to the cow here. All right, so that's looking pretty awesome. All right. I'm going to do a little bit more feathering here with that stroke to transition that soft blend. So light hand, there's little crisscross strokes back and forth. All right, so that's really pretty and lovely. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and work into our precious little cow. And I'm going to go ahead and get some of that shadow work done now. So I'm going to take my little buddy brush and we're going to work in, let's see, I'm going to get a different plate here. And we'll grab a dollop of the black to work with. So that'll be our Mars black here. And then let's go ahead and grab some cadmium orange because that will mix with the black and makes a brown. So we'll do a nice like nickel sized, a quarter sized dollop of that. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab a lot of these earth tones too. So we're going to do some cadmium yellow and some primary yellow. And sometimes a little bit of red. Cadmium red can be quite lovely in there. It's a nice warm red. And then if we want to cool it off a little bit, we can also do some primary magenta. And again, just think nickel size to quarter size dollops of those. All right, so initially we're going to do just a touch of the cadmium orange pushed into the black. So that makes a really dark, dark brown. And I'm going to go ahead and work on my little shadow here. You can lighten up that brown by just adding a lot more of that orange. And I'm going to start to work in some of the shadow. And so soft little curves, almost feels like you're doing little pushes and then little parentheses. So we have like a deep shadow happening underneath the ear here. We're going to pull that ear back out in front of that sky. So soft curves. Again, just feels like you make a little parentheses there. They kind of come down, soft curve down, and then lift off with a light hand as you kind of curl back to the other direction. Put a little bit more of that orange on that one. So now we're doing that curve like a parentheses. We're going to flip back to the other direction and lift off with a light hand. And just add a little touch of that orange in there too. And then you want to be really careful with the eyes to not interrupt that space, because that is just perfection if you followed the trace. You want to keep that in place and not have to redo that. And a little bit more of that orange to the black just to make a dark little shadow here. And a little bit of a black here to kind of frame the face. You don't want to lose that face shape. Really important there. So we're going to come around the edge. A little bit of a dark line right here too. And then this is Little Buddy as well. I'm just getting one that's not so filled with paint. Do a firm press. Make that little mouth in there. And again, this is another one of those shapes, and here we want to keep that in place. So we're going to do that shadow first. And then little soft curves over the mouth. Soft curls up. You can see how all of that inking that we did is making for some really nice guides for us to have shadow work come into play underneath all that paint. So that's very helpful. And then we're going to work that shadow underneath here too. Those little skin folds that come down. And it's already inked in, so we're just going to go over it, basically. Just follow it. Follow that with paint. When you saw your inking, just follow it with paint and your little buddy brush. That's just going to provide some really nice shading. And we have a little bit of a shadow coming in underneath the sunflower here. All right. So that's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and rinse out. And then now we're going to go in with our little bit brush and we're going to start to add some highlights now. And I'm going to grab a lot of white too to be able to play with nearby. Let Mama rest. Okay. All right, so grab some water and we'll start with some white here. And a little bit of that cadmium yellow. And then we'll start just underneath that hat and we'll start to pull down some of that fun hair texture. And it just softly blends in with that black, all that beautiful shadow work that we did. So we're going to do soft curves. It's going to feel kind of like you do a parentheses. And kind of like a little lazy S, and then you lift off with the light hand. And then I'm going to go light with more of that white and cadmium yellow, just underneath the eye, where that eye is going to stay in place. Grab a little bit of orange in there too. I'm going to warm that up, make it kind of peachy. So following the shape of that eye very carefully. And then up above it, we're also going to follow it very carefully. And do a little twirl, make your brush very thin. So do a little twirl. You also add a little bit of water too. Helps. Again, this is at making the paint a little bit thinner, easier to work on. And we're going to do a few of those little eyelashes right over the top. And I accidentally went over the eye a little bit, so I'm going to touch that up so I don't lose that shape. Rinse out. Again, you can grab a little bit of that orange. And do soft little curves for that hair. I'm going to grab a little bit of that cadmium red too, with a bit of the white. And I'll work underneath my eye here. Real careful. And then soft curve up above here. This is that cadmium red with the white. And then soft curve around it, almost like you're doing little strokes for eyeliner. So now you've got your eyes in place, and you can go back to just doing some fur texture. Soft little strokes here. We're going to come in from from the top underneath the hat, almost like you're doing the little bangs. These are the bangs on the Highland cow. So we'll start to work that in. So real careful around the top of the eye because you don't want to cover the eye. So you'll kind of do like an upside down V around the eye. Yeah. So doing all of that fur, you can bring in some extra strokes here, some more vibrant color. Like I just brought in some of that cadmium red. And a little bit more dramatic, but you can do some primary magenta too. It's a fun, vibrant color to work in. There's that little pop of pink in there. Of course, I'm always a fan of a little pop of pink in there. Or a lot, a lot of pink. Do a little bit of white, do some more shading, and soft fur over the top. Bring in some of that primary yellow. White and primary yellow is also really pretty for the nice highlights. Soft curves. And when you get to the end of the hair stroke, then just think, lift off with a light hand. And then some of these curves on the hair are going to be long. So we'll just kind of curve, make them kind of go the distance here. And a little bit of bright white is also pretty nice in there too. It's lots of repetition. And let's grab a little bit more of this brown. So I'm going to mix up more brown with our orange and our black. So you can kind of pull back in some shadows of that brown too, which is nice. And then up at the top too, if you want to work back in that shadow, you can come back in with a little bit of black that'll extend down from the hat right over the top. Just a little hint of that. Okay. And then let's rinse out. We'll go back to light shading here with all of our yellows and our cadmium red. And then we'll do a few of these fun little curls over the top of the ear. Again, it kind of feels like little parenthesis strokes, a soft curve. And when you get to the end of the stroke, then lift off with a light hand. So white's one of my favorite highlights to do in here. It's really impactful, leaves some really nice texture, shows up beautifully over the top of the shadow. So yeah, that white mixed with that primary yellow can be really nice highlight. Soft curve. Again, think parentheses, parentheses. Every once in a while, you'll have one that just kind of trails down a little bit. And then we still have that nice shadow that separates the ear, which is nice. And you can always blend back in a little bit of brown to help soften it a little bit. I like using that primary magenta there too is nice. It's a nice way to create a little bit of a shadow. And if you're more of a fan of just the earth tones and not so much a fan of the pink, then you can still make those darker shadows with just like the red and the black and the orange and the black to make just more of those natural browns too, if that's more of your color palette that you like. And just pushed in a lot more of that cadmium yellow. So really fun textures here. Now just going to continue this down into the body. Light curves. Some of those kind of switch back to the other direction and you kind of lift off with a light hand. This is a lot of the white and the cadmium yellow, cadmium red, primary yellow, just all those beautiful colors that we've been working with. You can see it kind of picked up a little bit of the black, and that actually creates a nice little shadow in there. And you can always come back in and reshade with your shadow. Like I'm doing a little bit of that black now, giving a little bit more of that light fur texture. Do a quick little wipe there to get that extra black off. Go back in with the light. And more white. Light strokes off the side here for that fur texture. Again, this is that white and cadmium yellow and primary yellow. And soft curve, lift off with a light hand. Open that in, you can do a little bit of that primary magenta in there too to create a nice little shadow or more of the brown or orange. And some of that black was a little bit wet and it actually blended really nicely. And a little bit of black kind of worked back into the shadow is nice. So I'm going to redo just teeny tiny little short strokes with the black to make that little fur texture come off the side of the face. And if you get a little bit of that peekaboo underneath where the stroke doesn't quite cover, add a little bit of water to help that paint flow into that space again. Again here. Do a little twirl, grab more paint. Have a little bit more of that shadow, kind of working that in. Do a little more of that pink and cadmium red. So lots of layers. All right, so starting to work into this little area here with the nose and the mouth, we're going to do a little bit of our cadmium red, a little bit of that primary yellow with it. And we're going to do like teeny tiny little soft curves in here. And we're going to alternate sides a little bit. So we're going this direction, that little parentheses will go this direction, that soft parentheses this way. And then we'll have the first strokes go this direction here, soft curves. And then you can work back in a little bit of that darker brown shadow with it. So let's kind of soften that. Bring back in a little bit of that fur texture. Again, brown is black and orange. So I'm going to basically just echo that same little bit of soft curve. And then even a little bit of black up at the very top. Kind of pull into it. That teeny amount of black, kind of doing those soft curves. Right over the top. Soft little curves each direction. Like that. And then we're going to go light again. And I am going to grab some more of these beautiful light colors, more of the cadmium orange. And then cadmium yellow, grab some more, kind of refresh a little bit here. And then some more of our primary yellow. And still have a lot of titanium white over here to the side. So I'm just going to grab more of that. So we have that to play with. All right. So I'm going to start to work on this top part of the nose, which is a really pretty light pink. So I'm going to do some big dollop of the white, little tiny touch of the primary magenta. Go really light baby pink here. Grab a little bit of water, even a little bit more of that white, very light pink. More water and twirl into that color. And we'll work this into the top of the nose. Be really careful about everything that's black in here. You want to preserve that. Well, mainly the nostrils. That's the main part, that little shadow work. The rest of it will be a little bit of shading underneath the top of the nose, but protect your nostrils. It's a nice feature. And again, if you do happen to cover, then go back over it with your permanent marker. But again, the rule is you don't want to put your permanent marker on wet paint or it'll ruin your permanent marker. So be careful there. Okay, so we've got our light pink there, and then I'm even going to come in with just a touch of pure white and do a little sweep of white right over the top. And it's almost going to feel like you're painting a little happy face. There's that soft curve, a happy face, which is just a little bit of reflective light up at the top of the nose. And then we're going to go with a little bit more of that light pink down here. But we're going to darken it up a little bit with a teeny amount of black. And that's going to push it to like a mauve color, because that gray mixes with the red and the white. Kind of makes a darker mauve. And we're going to start to push in right here in the center. And see, that other line serves you well as a little bit of a shadow underneath and a guide. Again, we're going more mauve here. So it's got that hint of gray. I'm going to pull that down over the top of the nose here in the center. And we're going to darken it up a little bit more with a tad more black. And push that in over the top, and then soft little strokes. And just kind of crisscross the brush back and forth to get a nice soft blend in here. And darken up even a little bit more. A darker gray. A little bit more of that shadow. There's just a touch of that Mars black in there with that pink. And then just kind of crisscross this out back and forth to softly blend. And we're going to just kind of work back real gently, that soft curve right through there. And then a little touch of white right here for that little bit of reflective light here. And again, just a little, it's almost like a little tiny happy face of that reflective light in there. You can do another little sweep of white right over the top. All right, now I'm going to come in with a stronger amount of cadmium orange and cadmium red. We're going to mix those two together. A little twirl. And we're going to take this around the curve of that nostril on the side. And then come down here on this side. And then just do little sweeps out to the side here. Let's soften that out. Little side pulls. And then I'm going to hit that with a lighter accent on top of that here. But we're going to get this, again, cadmium orange, cadmium red. A little bit, do a little twirl into that mix. Come around the curve of that nostril. And then soft little sweeps here. And it has a little bit of a curve to it out to the side. So there's a little curve there. And then we're going to do a little bit of white with our primary magenta for a darker pink. And we're just going to follow right on top of the nostril here, just to kind of accentuate it there. And again, primary magenta, a little bit of white, do a little twirl so you get a nice fine point. And we're just going to follow right here on top of the nostril. I'm just going to pull that down. And then I'm going to rinse out because I've got a little bit more of this light fur to pull in on the side. So this is going to be primary yellow and white and a little bit of that cadmium yellow. All right, so then we're going to, this paint's still wet, so we're going to do soft little touches into the side here. You know, a little bit more of a twirl and picking up a little bit more white here. And soft little fur strokes right here at the edge on the side. Curve these down a little bit. And again, a lot of white and these little fur accents, little tiny soft curves. And we're going to do the same thing here on the other side, where there's a little soft curve, and we're going to kind of come back around, take that curl. So it goes into a valley and then it curls back around, and then you lift off with a light hand. And then when you start to pull down, that's going to feel more just like a little parentheses. Slightly go over that orange and just work this back in here. So it softly blends a little bit with that orange, then kind of pulls out to the side. And then a lot of just pure white coming in right over the top with gentle little pulls, creates that really nice little texture of fur. And really light hand. You really act like you're just barely hitting the canvas. Very, very gentle. And then I still have a little bit to work in here. This is a little bit darker, so I'm going to use, let's rinse out. And then still using a little bit, we're going to work in a little bit of that cadmium red and a little of that primary magenta. You can use some of this brown too. That's also kind of pretty in there. Do that little twirl. So we got brown, which is orange and black, primary magenta, cadmium red. Do a little twirl. And we're just going to kind of work a little bit of shadow right here for that fur. And we'll curve this way, and then we'll curve this way. And to softly blend and lighten it a little bit, I'm going to grab a little bit of that cadmium yellow, kind of work that into it. So kind of work that back and forth. And then pick up a little bit more of that cadmium yellow, start to gradually work that in. And just go back and forth, varying your texture here. And then underneath the nose, we need to reinforce a little bit more of that black. So I'm going to come back in here, kind of work that in. Put a little bit of water, make that paint more fluid, twirl it out. We accentuate the underneath of that nose and softly kind of work that black shadow. Little tiny curves back into the fur in here. I'm going to dry that off a little bit and just barely, I've got a little teeny amount of black and I went ahead and dried out the excess water and I'm just going to use it, just kind of do a little bit of some shading just right in through here. And then a little bit of shading right in through here. And just follow that ink line and just a little bit of that soft shading just obscures that line with just a hint of that black paint right on top of the brush. And then I barely have, you can see how it's just dry brushing with that black I test on my napkin first. And then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of work this over the top of that nose. And I definitely want it to just be a hint of that black still left. And I'm just going to kind of work it back over the top. And it gives that little bit of shading. Just kind of work it back and forth like this. Reworking that mouth just a little bit. And I'm going to hit with a little bit more of a highlight here, kind of work back in those lights with the orange over the top of the mouth. Little tiny soft curves. Just kind of hitting back in with a little bit more of that fur texture. All right. Now, another fun little thing is having a little bit more of an eyelash over the top can be a real fun, it gives a lot of personality. So first thing before I do that, I notice I've got a little bit of black missing here, so I'm going to touch in. And first do a little bit of black eyelash that comes down. I'll start with that shadow first and just kind of follow the eye and make that little black. So it's kind of like doing eyeliner, but then it pulls down. And then you can echo that same move with just a thin white. So I grab a little bit of water, but I don't want too much because I don't want it to leave like a pool of water on the canvas. But this is more that white and just enough water to kind of thin it out. So I do that twirl to kind of squeegee out any excess water, but I want my brush at a nice fine point, so I keep twirling that. And then I think it's helpful sometimes too, just to kind of turn the canvas where you get a good angle and pull. So you can start by, like you're just following the eye, like you're doing eyeliner and curve around. And there's a little bit of an eyelash and just kind of lift off with a light hand. And then we did a pretty good amount of that same curve on this side, but if you want to follow up with another one, again, it's like you do a little bit of eyeliner and then lift off with a light hand. So it's just a teeny little stroke at the very end there. All right. Let's see here. And then I'm just kind of looking back over my fur, and you can start to just do a little bit more texture over the top with your lighter shades. We've got our nice shadows in place, so you can do a little bit of some orange, little soft curves on the side of the face here, or even lighten it up with even more of that like cadmium yellow. So there's just a lot of texture you can continue to add to your sweet little cow here. A little bit more of that white. More of that red. And kind of magenta, kind of do a little bit of fur in here too. And again, don't be afraid to kind of work back into it with more color and softly blend things. And grabbing a little bit more of that cadmium red. So lots of fun blending in here. Some yellow. All right. Sometimes it's hard to walk away. You could just keep doing this for a long time, but we're going to go ahead and go on to another step here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and work in my sunflower. So we've got our beautiful primary yellow, cadmium yellow. We're going to work those two together. You can do a little bit of orange in that too if you want. Get the brush a little bit all nice and loaded up. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of push into each one of these little petals and then work that out to the fine point. And you can leave quite a bit of texture over the top of this petal too. Again, firmer push here towards the center, and then as you get out towards the point, then you lift off with a light hand. Again, firm push here at the center, and then lift off with a light hand as you get out towards that point. Be a nice foundation here for our sunflower. And then you can add more highlight with just that little touch of, just kind of barely touch the canvas and let a little bit of that primary yellow just rest right on top as a thick little layer of paint. That just adds some nice texture. So come back at the very end and just lay a little amount of that right over the top. So just barely touch the canvas and let that lay on top. That provides a really nice pop of color. Then I'm going to come back in with some more brown and orange. So orange mixed with that black. We're gonna mix up more of that. That's gonna make our brown, and we're gonna just kind of tap, tap, tap that in. It creates that texture around the center. Tapping that in with our little bit brush. Gonna tap, tap, tap all the way around the center. And then in the center, then you'll pick up more of that black and tap that in. So just pure black and kind of tap in a little circle of black right in the middle. And then I'm going to rework, rinse out, and grab more of that cadmium yellow and tap that all the way around here with that brown. Like a little donut. Yeah, okay. Lovely. Rinse out. And then you can come back in with a little bit more brown. I would let it set up and dry a little bit, but little bit brush, you can accentuate a little bit more of your petals around here. And that can help define your little petals. And it also kind of helps obscure any of those little ink lines that might be peeking through. So a little bit of that brown, the little twirl with your little bit brush and grab a little bit of that brown that can help make each little petal a little bit more distinctive and adds that little bit of shadow in between each one. All right, let's rinse out. Now I'm going to come in with some of that cadmium red and then a little bit of the cadmium yellow. We're going to mix those two together. We're going to work this into the hat band. I'm just going to do a solid coat of that over the top. And then don't forget the center here. We're going to let that set up a little bit. And then we're going to do the buckle here, and it's going to be a light gray, so white and black. Black, mix those two together. White or gray here, more white. Do that little twirl, and we'll work this into the buckle. And grab a little bit of water to make that paint more fluid, easier to move. And then I'm going to add just a touch of white here. Just kind of line that. We'll work that little bit of white highlight right over the top for that reflective light accent. And just a little hit of that right there too. Take that same white with the light gray and just kind of go over this reflective light that's hitting the top of the hat. Just a line of that too. Take this around that curve. I'm going to rinse out and then follow up with black. So doing a little twirl into the pure black. And we're going to follow this. Put that with black in there. And have this come around the edge. And then just pure black right over the top here of the hat. Fill that in. And then you can even sometimes like to pull down that black again, just a little bit to kind of come back in over the shadow of the fur. All right, I'm going to rinse out. I want a little touch of distress happening on the band. So we're going to work in a little bit of that brown. Just kind of barely do a little side pull over the top of that red. Just little tiny horizontal strokes. And it does have almost the feel of being dry brushed over the top, and that's just giving it that little bit of worn patina on the hat band, like it's a little bit old and weathered. So little tiny dry brush strokes of that brown. And a teeny bit in here too for that shadow. Just tiny, teeny tiny little horizontal strokes. A little bit more of a firm shadow in here. All right. Then rinse out. And then we're going to start to work on our horns. So I'm going to do some white and our brown. So we've got orange, a little bit of some black, make that brown again, and let's add some white to it. So we're going to light brown here. Do a little twirl. Let's grab some water. Gonna make that more fluid. Do a little twirl. And then we're going to have this come in over the shadow of the horn. Firm press. Have it kind of go up to a point. And then do a little touch on our rag here. Let's grab some pure white and softly kind of work that pure white right in over the top. Softly blend those two together. So there's that white accent. And then we're going to softly transition those two. Well, I'm going to come back into that dark brown and just kind of make this little sunflower kind of pop out over the top of the foreground. All right. Now going back into that lighter brown, I'm going to change angles here so I have better positioning. And I'm going to follow this horn all the way across. I don't know what I did that. Took care of that. Okay. Now, so there's that soft brown little bit brush. We're going to follow the curve of the horn. Let's grab a little bit of water and make that paint a little fluid. Work that all the way into the point of the horn. Okay. Now rinse out. Grab a little bit of that pure white. And we're just going to work that into the tip there. And then it's a soft blend and overpaint right over the top of that brown that we just did. You can kind of hold the brush a little bit over to the side. Adding a little bit more of that white for that strong highlight up at the top. Just kind of lightly drag that over the top of that brown. I'm going to rework this gray. Make that come back out over the top. And then the black. And then bring a little bit of that black fur kind of back in over the top for that shadow. All right. And then we've got our little bit of shadow happening here on the hat. So that's going to be a really light gray. So and you know what? A little hint of blue. So I still have a little hint of my primary cyan blue. So I'll tap into that, or you might want to square a little bit of that, just a teeny amount. Work that into the black and the white. About 3 equal parts on that. Kind of gives you a nice little slate color. And then we'll work that into this lovely little bit of a highlight that happens. Grab a little bit more white to lighten that up a little bit. And a little bit more blue. Okay. I'm digging more of a slate. So I'm going to do a little bit more blue and more white. And twirl into that. And just go right back into that light where you've left it open from the trace. Just follow right into that. That's going to be your first step. And follow it all the way up here. Grab a little bit more white in some of these little areas too to add more highlight with your slate. All right, now to soften that, we'll come back in, rinse out, and come back in with our black. And grab a little bit of water. Twirl it out so you don't have too much water in there. Nice precision with our black. And then we're going to come back in over the hat, kind of work in over the top of where you had your permanent marker, paint that all in black. And then kind of softly go right around the outside edges of where you just painted, and that will softly kind of blend together now. Just a nice soft transition between the highlight of light that's hitting the hat and then the black of the hat. I'm coming in with more black now. And hit this little fringe that kind of comes off the hat. And lift off with a light hand. That makes that a bit more pronounced. And there's a little bit of working back and forth here, so I'm gonna kind of wiggle the brush a little bit with that slate gray and kind of wiggle it into that black to where it kind of softens it a little bit. Yeah, it's pretty. Okay. And with our bat, we can also go over that with a little bit of our black here too. Teeny tiny little touches for that head. And then re-emphasizing the wings. I do have a little bit of water that I rotated into the brush so that I could get these tiny little controlled strokes. And remember too, you can always just use your little permanent marker to help redefine that too over the top if you happen to paint over that. Again, just make sure that the paint is dry and you'll be good to go. Right. Okay, now we have the shading on the moon, the color of the moon. So we're going to take my little buddy brush here. And we're going to do maybe some white and our cadmium yellow. Mix those two together. Get that nice golden look. And before we do that, I'm going to take just my little bit brush and grab some of that orange and the black for that brown. And we're going to go ahead and kind of pounce on that brown so we don't lose that shape. So our moon has a lot of texture to it. So we're going to go ahead and work all that in. And I come in with my little buddy brush and kind of tap into that. Tap, tap, tap. And I'll do a curl around the edge. And curl this around the edge. And then let's continue with that brown and kind of tapping that in over the top. Tap, tap, tap. It's a little bit of some nice little therapy in there too. Cheeks out. Come back in with a little bit of your white. And we're going to start to tap in a little bit of white right here over the top too. Get some of that moon texture happening. I just tapped out a little bit of that water because I want this to be a little bit more of a dry brush action happening. A little bit more of that white, and you can even come in with some of that primary yellow in there too and kind of start to tap that in. Create that texture. Tap, tap, tap. And you can always work back in to more of like the shading if you want to darken up. I'm just tapping back into the brown now. It gets that nice little texture there. And then using your little bit brush, kind of come back in with a little bit more of that white and that primary yellow, and do your accents here for your circle. Just right around the edge. And of course, don't forget, you can always kind of turn this a little bit here too. And some of that primary yellow in there too is really nice for making a nice golden look here on the edge. Grabbing some water to make it more fluid. And a little bit more water really helps. And then I'm going to come back in and do that little tap, tap, tap again. Just adding that little bit of texture. All right. I think we are pretty much done with our beautiful little Halloween Highland cow. I always find ways to play with a little bit more when I'm done, but that, yeah, that gives you pretty much the general idea here. And again, fine tuning at the end, you can always use your permanent marker to go ahead and touch up details like eyes and eyelashes. And then I went ahead and left my trace. I had those little white spots left. Now, for some reason, you happen to cover those up on accident, a little trick you can use. You can take the end of your brush with your little bit brush, barely touch into that white, and with a really gentle hand, you can come in over the top and just hit that again with that white right over the top to create that little pop of reflective light that comes in over the top of those eyes. Really helps make those pop with a lot of personality. And then again, little details, like this is all dry now, so you can kind of work back in, like over the top of your little nostrils if you need to reinforce a little bit. Or like with your eyes here, you can always come back in and redo your fullness around your eyes. If it's nice and dry, you can do that too. Or your little bat, that kind of thing. So really helpful to use that permanent marker there. And then signing your masterpiece, you just want to use like a contrasting color over the top. And you can use little bit brush and just a little bit of water and rotate into any color that you like to go ahead and sign in the bottom right-hand corner here. All right, I think we are done. We just want to thank you again so very much for painting with us today. It has been a pleasure. And all the supplies that you need here for this class are on our website at tipsyartist.com. Link is below in the description. If you have any questions, please let me know. You can reach out by email or ask me a question in the comments too. Happy to help. Thank you again for joining us. Please give us a little follow too. We appreciate your support very much of our small family business. And y'all have a lovely rest of the day. Toodles.